Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Real Property Institute Canada webinar. Before starting, may I ask everyone to disconnect from your VPN if you're still connected, please? Otherwise, our poll questions feature won't work. Thank you. Okay, I'll start right now. So my name is Claudia Beauchemin. I'm the National Contaminated Sites Program Manager at Public Services and Procurement Canada. You might prefer PSPC, but I also work with the Real Property Institute of Canada, which is the RPIC, since I have the honor to chair the next Federal Contaminated Sites RPIC workshop. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to this RPIC webinar on Federal Contaminated Sites Annual Work Plan. This presentation is recorded. The link to access the recording as well as the presentation will be sent to you in the next few days. Today's presentation is divided into 3 sections. At first, Eric Gay from ECCC will present an overview of the Federal Contaminated Sites Action Plan, better known as the FIXAP program. And then my colleague from PSPC, Diane Thériault, will present the demand forecast for the remaining part of the FIXAP Phase 4, which represent the current year and the 2 following ones, so until March 2025. And then Jeffrey Yakinchuk from CERNAC will conclude this webinar presenting the Northern Abandoned Mine Reclamation Program. So during the presentation, you can ask questions in writing in the Q&A section. We will take the time to answer them at the end of the presentation. There will be also an interactive question period at the end of the presentation. You will just need to use the hand raise button so we can open your microphone. Before leaving you to the presenters, I would like to ask you a few questions. You'll see the questions appear on your screen. You can choose the answer directly. So the first question, do you work for private sector or federal government? Let's see the answers. So most of you comes from private sector, great, and a lot of people from federal government also. Thank you very much. The second question, in which province or territory do you primarily work? You will be able to choose more than one. So please. Okay, great. Let's see the results. Most of you come from Ontario region, but then a lot from different part of the country, which is great. Thank you very much. And finally, we are curious to know if you have worked on federal government contracts in the past. So it's a yes or no question. Great, let's see the results. So most of you, 88%, have worked on federal contracts in the past. It's great. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for your participation. Now I'll leave the floor to Eric Gay. Enjoy the presentation.
Merci, Claudia. Good day, everybody. So my name is Eric Gay. I'm one of the managers at the Federal Contaminated Sites Action Plan, and today I'm going to introduce you to what we call FIXAP. And yeah, so prochaine, s'il vous plaît. So a little bit of background on federal contaminated sites and FICSAP. So as you know, there's tens of thousands of contaminated sites in the country. Mostly are privately owned or belonging to provinces or municipalities. But there's about like 6,000 of them right now that are under federal responsibility, and that are active or suspected sites. We have about like 17,000 sites that are under federal responsibility also, but those sites are closed. So a little bit of background on FICSAP. FICSAP was established in 2005, responding to an OAG report on to address federal contaminated sites. So the overall objective of the program is reduce health and environmental risk and financial liability for the government. The first 15 years of the program have been divided in 3 phases, from 2005 to 2020. About like 4.5 billion has been invested during those 3 phases. The program has been renewed in 2020 for another 15 years, also divided in 3 phases. We're right now in the first phase of the program, which goes from 2020 to 2025, and we have $1.2 billion to invest in that phase. Also, FICSAP is a group of people. Let's say there are 17 departments, what we call custodians, or agencies that are involved in the program, and 4 support departments, and a secretariat. And that secretariat is under the umbrella of Environment Canada, with support from Treasury Board. We provide technical support, advice, as long as program management responsibilities, and ACCC has also contaminated sites that they own. So ACCC is also a custodian for contaminated sites. Why did the program got renewed? Is, as you can imagine, there were still lots of liability in the books at the end of phase 3. So deep sites or progress at the end of 2021-2022, we still had over like $2 billion in liability for FICSAP eligible sites remaining. So still lots of work to do under FICSAP. Prochaine. So for those who are less familiar, what sites are eligible for federal funding under FICSAP? First of all, contaminated sites under federal responsibility needs to be on federal lands, or they need to be on non-federal land, but where the government has caused the contamination. Let's say from, if we have leased properties, and we have created contamination there, so the government is still responsible for that contamination, or on non-federal lands where the government has accepted the responsibility. At FICSAP, we deal with legacy contamination mainly, so not necessarily with new contamination. So the main eligibility criteria to be able to be funded by the program needs to be a legacy contamination. And when we say legacy contamination, we mean contamination that occurred prior to 1998. Also, they need to be high priority sites. Sites must be assessed and classified using the national classification system, and they need to be classified as high priority or medium priority to be eligible for remediation funding. The program also provides 3 types of funding to custodians. We do provide funding for assessment, for remediation, risk management, and program management. For phase 4, we have expanded. We had the luxury to expand our eligibility criteria to increase flexibility and efficiency in the program. So as example, bundling lower priority sites to high priority sites makes the lower priority sites for eligible to the program. And we've also have more flexibility for sites that are on reserve. Prochaine. So not all federal contaminated sites are eligible to FICSAP. Other sources of funding are also used. CERNAC has, over the last couple of years, developed their own program to address 8 of the largest abandoned mines in the north. And other custodians or federal organizations also uses their own funding to address sites that cannot be funded or that are not eligible under FICSAP. Prochaine. Where can you find information on all those sites? So all closed, suspected, or active contaminated sites are in an inventory. That inventory is the Federal Contaminated Sites Inventory with the acronym FCSI in English. That information is publicly available. It is updated annually. We just went over the last update for 2021-2022, and the inventory is under the responsibility, let's say, of Treasury Board Secretariat, and can be accessed at the link that you see here. In the CSI, as of today, we have about like 24,000 sites. You know, as mentioned before, about 5,000 of those sites are being actively assessed or remediated. About like 1,500 are only suspected at this point and requires assessment. And the vast majority of the sites are today closed. Prochaine. So here I'll not go, you know, in details, but you have the let's say regional distribution of the federal contaminated sites by province. So you have the number of suspected sites that is listed, the number of active sites, and the total number of sites. So this is provided you today for information, but I will not go over this slide with you. Prochaine. So achievements, what has the program achieved over the last like 17 years? So far, $5 billion invested in contaminated sites. Funding spent or work done on you know, over 2,500 of them, with almost like 2,000 fully remediated. Jobs creation, over almost like 25,000 jobs created, and over like $2 billion spent in the northern part of the country. Also on the science development side, you know, many almost like 100 environmental guidelines, technical guidance tools have been developed over the years. Ocean. So the renewal of the program was an opportunity to link the program to, let's say, other Government of Canada priorities. So for phase 4, you know, we were able to link this to a more prioritized actions, more collaborative planning, and more communication with the industry. You know, today's talk is an example of that. And so that's mainly linked to risk reduction, but for the other federal priorities, you know, more focus on indigenous engagement in our projects, strong link with innovative technologies, and of course, climate change resiliency. Prochaine. So here's, you know, is the overall breakdown in terms of funding in site activities. So you have the numbers, you know, roughly $1 billion in remediation risk management over phase 4, over like $24 million in assessment, a lot of funding in program management. And on the right-hand side here, you have the number of sites that have that are included in the work plan for the phase. Prochaine. Further information required, you know, so at those at that link, you'll find a lot of information related to FICSAP. And we also have a generic mailbox that we monitor every day, multiple times a day. So for any other inquiry, please never hesitate to reach out to us. We will respond to your requests as soon as we can. So that is it for me today. Jeffrey and Diane will be our next presenter with the forecasted demand. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diane Theriault, and I work with Claudia at PSPC at the Contaminated Sites NCOE, National Center of Expertise. And today I'm going to present to you the Federal Contaminated Sites Demand Forecast for the FICSAP program between 2022 and 2025. As Eric mentioned, we're currently in phase 4 of FICSAP, which goes to 2025. So I'm presenting what all of the federal government departments are forecasting in terms of contaminated sites work for the next 3 years. So just a couple caveats before we go into the data. So the information that is contained in the presentation is the best information that we currently have, and it provides a big picture perspective on FICSAP investments, so we don't go into the site-by-site details. The data is extracted from the latest national work plan and the Federal Contaminated Sites Inventory, and it's a snapshot of funding submissions, and these get updated a couple times a year, so they are subject to possible revisions. Custodians sometimes experience project delays due to weather conditions or other unforeseen circumstances, such as a pandemic, which can affect their work plans. So although projects might be approved, they may not go ahead for logistical reasons. And annual updates will improve future year estimates in terms of quality and quantity. So before I dive in, I just want to give a little background. So as part of our expert support role within the FICSAP program, PSPC is responsible for providing forecasted expenditure estimates to the environmental industry in order to create an awareness of the demand for services, and so that the industry can build adequate capacity to respond to that demand. So the data, as I mentioned, focuses on the fiscal years 2022-23 through 2024-25, which represents the remainder of phase 4 of FICSAP. And as I mentioned, it's not possible to provide details at a site level, just to ensure the integrity of the bidding process and to make sure that adequate stakeholder engagement's been completed before projects are announced. So we're presenting this information so that you have a better understanding of the work, of where the work is and through which departments. I've also included a breakdown for every region in future slides. We won't have time to go through every region, but I will quickly show you a couple highlights, and you'll also be receiving a copy of the full deck after the session. So if we start looking at this slide, this provides you a national overview of FICSAP phase 4 for the current year. So that's from April 1st, 2022 to March 31st, 2023. You can see here we have a total forecast of 319 million for this year. 9.7 of that is in assessment funding, and 310 million is through remediation and long-term monitoring. You'll see the graph at the top is a breakdown of the assessment funding by department. So you'll see here that DND is receiving the majority of the funding this year, followed by Environment Canada and then Indigenous Services Canada, or ISC. And for those who don't know, DND is Department of National Defense. And then the lower graph is a breakdown of the remediation funding by department. And you'll see again that the majority of the funding is coming through DND, followed by Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, and then Indigenous Services Canada. And if we look at the donut chart at the lower left corner, you'll see a breakdown by region. So the majority of the funding is coming through Pacific and Northern region, followed by Ontario, and then Quebec and Prairies, and then Atlantic. So in this slide, I've broken down the funding by procurement provider. So which department will do the actual contracting for the work. And the reason we do this is you'll understand a little bit better later on in the presentation, but the opportunities to bid on contracts are posted on different websites, depending on who is doing the contracting. So in this slide, you can see that for this year nationally, the majority of the contracting is being done through PSPC, and then followed by other government departments who do their own procurement internally, and then DCC, which is Defense Construction Canada, and they do all of the contracting for D&D. And this slide, it's a national overview for the next 2 years, so 2023-24 and 2024-25. You'll see that there's an overall forecast of 651 million, with 8 million in assessment and 643 in remediation and long-term monitoring. As you can see, the breakdown by fiscal year, again, the majority of the funding is coming through remediation and long-term monitoring. If you look at the bottom bar graph, you'll see the breakdown by department. Again, the majority of the funding is coming through D&D, followed by ISK and CERNAC. And then looking at the donut chart again, you'll see that the majority of the funding is coming through Pacific and Ontario, followed by Northern, and then Quebec, Prairies, and Atlantic. And here we have, again, a breakdown by procurement provider for the next 2 years. You'll see a very similar breakdown. So the majority of the contracting is going through PSPC, followed by internal, and then DCC. So next, I'm going to go through a couple of the regions to just to give you some highlights and to give you an idea of how things can vary from one region to another. So let's start by looking at Atlantic. So here for this current year, we're looking at a forecast of 20.7 million with 1.4 million in assessment and 19.3 million in remediation and long-term monitoring. You'll see that the majority of the funding, assessment funding, is coming through D&D, as well as for the remediation funding. The majority is coming through D&D. And then if you look at the breakdown by province, you'll see that the bulk of the funding is in Newfoundland and Labrador, followed by Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. If we look at the breakdown by procurement provider for Atlantic for this fiscal year, you'll see that the vast majority is being done through DCC, and that reflects the fact that a lot of the funding is coming through D&D. So now let's skip over to Ontario region. So for Ontario region, for this fiscal year, we have a total forecast of 59 million with 0.6 million in assessment and 58.4 in remediation long-term monitoring. So in Ontario region, the majority of the funding is coming through ISK, or Indigenous Services Canada. And then for remediation, again, the majority through ISK and then through D&D. And for a breakdown by procurement provider, so in Ontario this year, you'll see that the majority of the assessment funding is being procured internally. And then for the remediation long-term monitoring, it's a little more evenly split between internal and PSPC, with the remainder through DCC. And that reflects the fact that a lot of the funding is coming through Indigenous Services Canada. They do a lot of their internal procurement, but they also provide a lot of funding directly to First Nations, who then do their own procurement, and they provide this funding through grants and contributions. So now we'll skip over to the northern region. So the northern region includes the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. And you'll see here for this fiscal year, there's a forecast of 70.2 million, with 2.4 million in assessment and 67.8 in remediation long-term monitoring. The majority of the funding, assessment funding, is coming through Environment and Climate Change Canada. And then the remediation funding, majority is through Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. And for the northern region, the majority of the procurement will be completed through PSPC for this fiscal year. So I'd like to take a minute to just talk to you about this demand forecast tool that PSPC has developed. So it's called the FICSAT Phase 4 dashboard, and it's an interactive map tool, which I'll show you what it looks like on the next slide. But before we look at that, I also wanted to mention that we have information that you can access on a site called GC Collab. So there you can access the user manual for this interactive map, as well as demand forecast analysis report, which is something that we prepare every year. And it provides a detailed breakdown of the forecasted work through the FICSAT program over the next 5 years. And it provides a little bit more information than what was presented today, and with some more details included. So this might be helpful to you, and I really encourage you to check it out. So this is what the interactive map looks like. So all of the FICSAT sites that are forecasted to be funded over the next 5 years are on this map. You can zoom in and click on individual sites, and then you'll have a little box pop up, which will show you some of the site details, such as who the custodian is, the contaminant type that is found on the site, the medium that's contaminated, and also the forecasted range of funding for the site over the next 5 years. There's also options for different base maps and different layers that you can add or remove. And we're also in the process of adding some additional filters to make it easier to kind of narrow down your search and find the information that you're looking for. This map gets updated twice a year, so once in the summer and then again in the winter. So this slide gives you some instructions on how to join GC Collab and create an account. As I said, you'll have access to this deck afterwards. So if you want to just follow those steps, and if you have any questions or problems at all, there is a help page on the GC Collab page, or you can feel free to contact me directly, and I'll do my best to help you get set up. I also want to talk about the different procurement approaches that are used in the FICSAT program. So generally, lower dollar value sites, and when I say lower dollar value sites, typically it's under 1 million. So they're generally procured by standard procurement tools, so such as standing offer agreements, task authorizations, supply arrangements, and these are advertised on Buy and Sell. And this is Canada's electronic tendering service, which will soon be replaced by Canada Buys, the recently launched online procurement platform, which I'll talk a little bit more about soon. But also Opportunities are also posted on MERCS, and that's the site that's mainly used by DCC. So just to talk a little bit more about these standard procurement tools for those who aren't familiar with them. So PSPC uses them in all regions to access consulting or contractor contaminated site services. So when a standing offer is set up, a request for proposal document is posted on Buy and Sell, and it specifies the services, the type of services that we're looking for, and how many firms we're looking to have qualified to be on the standing offer. Consultants and contractors are then invited to submit their bids. And once the firms are successful and they've been selected to be on the standing offer, there's usually a limited number of firms that are accepted. So they can vary from 1 to 5 or more, depending on what we're looking for. And the standing offer will remain in place for typically 2 to 3 years. Once it's set up, separate contracts or call-ups are set up with the firms on an as-needed basis for specific projects and for the duration of the standing offer. Supply arrangements are similar in that consultants and contractors have to submit bid to become qualified, but new consultants and contractors can submit a bid to become pre-qualified for the duration of the supply arrangement. So with a standing offer, you are qualified at the beginning, and then the firms that are selected to be on the standing offer won't change for the duration. But with a supply arrangement, we can continually add more firms to the list of pre-qualified. Buy and Sell has been the authoritative source for government procurement information since it launched in 2010. It'll be one of the online resources that will be really helpful to you. You can use it to track tenders and sign up to be alerted to new ones. It's also a great resource for information to help you understand the federal government contracting process. And as I mentioned, you should also be aware of the recently launched PSPC online procurement platform called Canada Buys. So this will eventually replace Buy and Sell over a long transition period. For now, all tenders are still being posted on Buy and Sell. And we will gradually start posting opportunities on Buy and Sell that link to the new platform. So this new platform, it's really going to help streamline the procurement process. So for example, we're going to move from paper-based to solely online procurement. So you won't need to drop off paper copies of your bids anymore. Bidders will also be able to create a company profile in the system without having to refill it out every time they submit a new bid. So I really recommend that you check out the website to learn more. So generally, higher dollar value and more complex sites. So in general, that's above $1 million. So those are procured through the tendering process, and they'll also be advertised on Buy and Sell and MERCS. And then individual First Nations and tribal councils, they put out requests for bidders for assessment and remediation work on their sites, on their lands, using funds provided by Indigenous Services Canada through grant and contribution agreements. Procurement Assistance Canada is formerly known as the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises. It was created as part of PSPC to help support small and medium enterprises in the federal procurement process. So its role is to engage with companies, to assist and inform them on how to sell their goods and services to the Government of Canada, and to work to help reduce procurement barriers in an effort to ensure fairness in the process. And they do this by listening to the concerns of the different companies, answering questions, helping them to understand the procurement process, and also potentially helping them identify opportunities that they can bid on. I also wanted to mention a couple ways that we're working to increase Indigenous participation on FICSAT contracts. So we have set aside standing offers, which are set up under the procurement strategy for Indigenous business. PSBC currently has Indigenous set-aside standing offers in Atlantic, Quebec, and Ontario regions. And whenever these tools are renewed or new tools are put out, they will be posted on Buy and Sell. And where set-asides aren't being used, we can incorporate Indigenous opportunities, criteria, or considerations into the solicitation documents. And these include socioeconomic benefits for Indigenous communities near the work sites. So they can help promote Indigenous employment, training, and subcontracting to Indigenous businesses and suppliers. I also wanted to mention the Clean Growth Hub. So this is a unique whole of government focal point for clean tech that was created to help innovators access and navigate the federal program landscape. So they can be a really useful resource for those companies that are trying to develop clean tech. So they engage directly with these companies to understand their needs in order to connect them with appropriate funding programs and services and federal experts who can answer questions and provide support on regulations, standards, government procurement, skills and training. So please reach out to them if you're trying to develop some clean technology, and they can help potentially connect you to funding programs and help you navigate the government processes. And that's the end of my portion of the presentation. My contact information is included later on in the slide deck. And I'm going to hand it over now to Jeffrey, who's going to talk about the Northern Abandoned Mine Reclamation Program.
Excellent. Thank you, Diane. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Yakubchuk, and I'm a policy analyst working on Northern Contaminated Sites within Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. So I'm just going to provide a short overview of the Northern Abandoned Mine Reclamation Program and its two major projects. So the program is a large piece of the federal government's contaminated sites workload. In 2020, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, the acronym CERNAC, was able to secure a long-term source of funding for the Northern Abandoned Mine Reclamation Program. This has allowed the department to accommodate the lengthy remediation schedules posed by its portfolio of abandoned mine projects. The initial investment for the program included $2.2 billion for 15 years of work. The program exclusively funds the remediation of the 8 largest and highest risk abandoned mine projects in Yukon and the Northwest Territories. So prior to 2020, when the program started, these projects had been a part of the Federal Contaminated Sites Action Plan. The main benefit of having this standalone program is that it allows for longer term tenders, greater certainty for communities impacted by the former mine sites, and increased economic opportunities for Indigenous peoples and Northerners. And many of the tools that Diane presented are also used on the Northern Abandoned Mine projects, including the information reporting to the Federal Contaminated Sites Inventory and PSBC's Buy and Sell application, as well as those mechanisms to increase Indigenous employment on contaminated sites projects. Next slide. I see we have a couple hands raised. I don't know if we want to answer those questions now or after the fact. Perhaps we'll address the questions in a couple minutes when we're done the presentation. So this is just a map of the Northern Abandoned Mines portfolio of sites and the First Nations communities located within proximity to those projects. As you can see from some of these examples, namely Clinton Creek at the top left of the map on the border of Alaska, many of these projects due to the remoteness, many of these projects pose challenges to the federal government and contractors to address. Next slide, please. So the Giant Mine and the Faro Mine are categorized as our department's major projects given their cost, scope, and complexity, and account for the majority of CERNAC's environmental liability. The department employs standalone teams that work exclusively on each of these projects, with staff located in both the National Capital Region and their respective territories. So for Giant, it's a former gold mine within the city of Yellowknife with significant regional public and media interest. Remediation will require the containment of toxic arsenic trioxide waste, removal of mine buildings, and remediation of surface areas, including the tailings ponds. Parsons Inc. Serves as the main construction manager on site. And to give you a sense of the current work going on the project, last year, the project began the construction of early remediation works and completed the final remediation designs, cost estimates, and updated the site-wide management and monitoring plans. And this year, the project's looking to procure the water treatment plant contract, as well as complete the decontamination and deconstruction of the town site, and also conduct a dewatering study on the South Pond tailings. Next slide, please. And Faro Mine is located in Yukon, 4 hours north of Whitehorse, and was once the largest open pit lead zinc mine in the world. The risks at site are posed by the acid generating waste rock, tailings, and contaminated water. Last year, the project completed the procurement of a main construction manager and of a care maintenance contractor. As well, the project was transitioned to a joint project delivery model with Public Service and Procurement Canada. So in previous years, this project was being managed by Yukon government and paid for by Canada. So for this year, the project is looking to contract out the permanent water treatment plant design, complete the environment and socioeconomic assessment, and continue to remove water discharge from the site. So those are the two major projects for CERNAC. All 8 of these projects are huge in scope and are going to take years to complete, and will likely be monitored for minimum 25 years and more in some cases. So if I'm not wrong, I believe this was the last slide in the presentation. There you go. Yeah. I'll hand it over to, I believe, Claudia to manage the questions.
Yeah, that's great. We have plenty of time for questions. So I see that there's no, there's a question in the Q&A and there's 2 hands. Let's begin with the hands. I know that Joanne has her hand for a few minutes already. So is that possible to allow? Oh, do I have to open her microphone? How do we work that? Oh, there's Alvin.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, Alvin.
Okay, great. So I was watching this documentary recently. It's called Man versus Ford. So I think it's a, oh, I got a pop-up. Let me join as panelist. I guess you're going to see.
Okay.
No, I think we have Joanne now, who's unmuted.
Hi, Joanne.
Hi, sorry, I had to step away for a minute. I missed something.
Well, you have your hand raised, so I guess you had a question.
Oh, sorry. Nope.
Okay.
I don't know how that happened.
Okay. So we're listening to you, Alvin.
Okay, great. So yeah, I started watching this documentary. It's called Man versus Ford, if I remember correctly. And basically it's a First Nation community that lives somewhere near Detroit. Like, so the Ford Manufacturing Company, they had a routine for many decades that they would scoop up the leftover paint from their automobile manufacturing plants, and they would put it in the trucks and they would drive it out of the city and dump it on First Nation land at night when people are supposed to be in bed sleeping. So the reason that I thought this is an interesting thought is that I would guess that over the past kind of like 50 to 100 years, a lot of stuff happened like that, probably because we did not have modern day proper recycling facilities and that kind of thing, So as we're looking at these statistics that shows D&D, the most funding is going there. And then ISK and CERNAC, if you actually put them together, and I work for ISK, we'd be in first place. And I'm thinking, okay, well then a lot of FICSAP dollars are going into D&D and ISK and CERNAC. But I thought, in your opinion, like what is the most common cause of contaminated sites, or like maybe like the top 5 most common causes of contaminated sites in the country, particularly in light of the fact that if I think, okay, if ISK and CERNAC are getting so much funding, well, probably First Nation reserve land in the entire country only counts for maybe 1% of the land, I think. Like it's not, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would kind of ballpark that 99% of the country is crown land and 1% has been set aside for reserve land. I mean, that could be way off, but you know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm kind of surprised to see so much FICSAP funding is going into ISK and CERNAC. And I kind of think what do you guys think? Like, what's the top 5 most common causes of contaminated sites in the country?
So who wants to go? Well, first, I think that for the dollar value, there's the abandoned mine, which is a really big part of it, and also the Phase 4 program focused on indigenous land. Also, Eric, you might want to talk a little bit more about that, but the money is available for these territories. It's easier.
I would say the most common contaminant is hydrocarbons and metals.
Everywhere,
so,
yeah.
As a general, so there are other ones I cannot name you 5, but from a department to another, this is the general picture.
Yeah, and Alvin, for on reserve, it was usually historically really poor fuel management. A lot of diesel fuel was used, and they had large tanks and distribution systems. So there was a lot of leakage issues in the past. I mean, that's why we're seeing a huge move from the nations towards clean energy, and that's the department's hoping to support that. And part of it is because of the legacy of contamination.
Yeah, and if I could just support what Claudia said, from CERNAC's perspective, the dollar value majority definitely comes from our Northern Abandoned Mine projects. They just tend to be so large in scope that they kind of dwarf some of the smaller projects in the what we call the southern provinces. These materials are, I guess, the mining materials are tend to found in the territories more than the provinces. And that's why, you might not have as many projects in the territories, but they tend to be much larger in scope.
Claudia, je ne sais pas si tu vas aller voir les questions.
Yeah, there's questions in the Q&A. So the first one from Brian. Why is the federal government responsible for those former private sector sites? So I guess it's a question for Jeffrey.
Sure, that's it's a bit of a tough one. The idea is that, you know, a lot of these companies, they did have securities attached to their operations, right? So if they failed, you know, they would give back a certain dollar amount to the federal government. However, these securities aren't covering what's happening when they are going bankrupt in the past. And when a company goes insolvent, it becomes the responsibility of the federal government. So that's why they come to us. And, you know, just from a more of a philosophical perspective, Canada benefited from all the royalties they gained off these mineral extraction. And it's just, it seems logical that if there's no one left to pay, Canada becomes the owner of last resort, and we have to address the past.
Thank you. And Brian, again, when will these sites be considered decontaminated? Jeffrey?
Oh, this one's for me as well.
Yeah, well, it's the second part of the question, I guess.
Oh, right. It's from Brian as well. So I guess the technical answer is when you know, substance levels are considered to be safe in the ground. So, you know, I think everywhere there could be a minimal amount of, you know, whatever metal, whatever you know, hydrocarbon, but if it's determined to be a high enough level where it could cause, you know, illness, or it could affect water, could affect animals and plants, then that has to be treated. So once we get to an acceptable level of this substance in the ground, in the water, in the air, that's when it's considered to be decontaminated. And it's an interesting question because, you know, there's differing opinions on what is considered to be acceptable. What the government might initially think is safe, you know, the local community might think, you know, we need to do more. So we're always trying to work on, you know, having an understanding on what kind of work we have to do on these projects.
Thank you, Jeffrey. There's another question. Can you please comment on dollar value of projects for Indigenous communities? Can be sole source versus invited bidders versus open bid via MERCs. So, well, regarding Indigenous communities, usually the money goes through grant and contributions with ISK, and then the process, we are not involved in the process of bidding. Maybe Diane, you want to add something on that?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. It's decided on a project by project basis, so it'll depend, you know, how much funding is received for that specific project, and there's certain procurement rules that we have to follow, or that ISK will have to follow. So it's really difficult to provide a dollar value because those decisions aren't made until you know, the project goes ahead and you start looking at your procurement options.
Thank you. There's a question from Robert. What fraction of PFAS contamination will end up under FIXAP, given the constraint that it applies only to legacy sites?
So from what we know in the inventory, the vast majority of PFAS contaminated sites are linked to Transport Canada and National Defence for their former firefighting training areas. So the vast majority of that contamination occur pre-1998, so it's FIXAP eligible. It is, or it will be.
And we may invite you to consult the report, the link. Diane, what's the name of the report again that we produce every year? And there's a chart with all types of contamination, and you see the fraction coming from PFAS. So it can be interesting to look at.
Yeah, that's the demand forecast analysis report that I mentioned, and you can find it on GC Colab.
I think we have another question. Andrew is asking if $5 billion has been spent over the last 15 years and there is $2.2 billion of liability. Are we anticipating that FICSAP will have accomplished its goals in 6 to 8 years? Eric.
So the answer is no. Liability varies from a year to another. There's always a decrease in liability, but annually there's an increase in liability. I don't want to get into the weeds of how do we calculate liability. But as an example, liability is influenced by inflation. So as you can imagine, this year and the coming years, inflation is kind of high. So if we don't do anything, liability would go up by just by the inflation factor. So we have 1 billion for the phase, and there's also, due to assessment or due to remediation project where we find additional contamination, there's always like new liability that is booked on an annual basis. So no, I mean the program has been renewed for 15 years from 2020 to 2035. So I think there's going to be plenty of work for everybody until 2035 coming from the federal departments.
Thank you, Eric. There's only 2 minutes left, and I see that there's not in the Q&A box, but in the chat, I see 2 questions, one from Tracy and the other one from Nata. I'm not sure if we have time to answer that, or we might answer later on. What do you think? Even just reading these questions will take it at 2 minutes left, I guess. So well, I assure you that we will reach out and we will answer your questions. Don't hesitate. You have our contact information at the end of the presentation. So don't hesitate to reach us. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today and for your participation. We will have the same presentation in French tomorrow for those who want to join us again. Why not? Or maybe for colleagues who couldn't attend today. Otherwise, before letting you go, I would like to announce the theme for the 2022 RPIC Federal Contaminated Sites Workshop that will take place virtually in November. So the theme is climate change considerations in contaminated sites management. The workshop will take place on November 2nd and 3rd, 2022. And the request for abstract will be sent in the next few weeks. I hope to have the opportunity to see you soon in person. Until that, don't hesitate to reach us. And thanks again. Thank you very much.